when you talk about Red Dawn scenarios, or you refer to the movies that have been done about this, sometimes people think, well, this is just a theoretical danger, right? I mean, who could ever imagine a Red Dawn in America? This sounds like a Hollywood movie and whatnot, but this thing almost happened in Germany, right here in 1923. And we're not talking about some banana republic here. This was Germany. And so that almost happened. All the pieces were in play. This was a multi-pronged strategy, just like they would do it today. They had the propagandists, they had the underground fighters ready, they had the infiltrators everywhere, they had terrorist groups ready, Soviet advisors ready, Soviet generals ready. They were ready to ship in stuff, get the ball rolling, and then the Red Army would join these communists here and close the deal and seal the fate of all Germans. They actually wanted to make Germany the center of the world revolution. That's what they called it. They want to wave the flag over Berlin and say, this is our gateway into the West. And guess who would have been the next target? France, Britain, and the United States, for the most part. And once they would have taken over Germany, they would have gotten all the industry, all the technology, all the universities, and the personnel, the engineers and the people who worked in all these specialized factories. So by taking over us, that makes Russia more dangerous. And this was the case back then. It certainly is the case now. So I've compiled some of the notes. So we're going to quickly go through this old implementation of the program, and then we get into the current implementation of the very same program.
No, that sounds good. I mean, Lenin actually had stated early in the Bolshevik revolutionary days in Russia, in their years in power, that whoever has Germany has all of Europe.
Exactly. And now, of course, the Weimar era of Germany was the most liberal era, I think, in German history. So this is right after World War I. There was a shaky democracy, all kinds of radicals running around, and you had these competing ideologies, not just people that said we want a republic, a democratic republic. Then you had the guys that said, no, we really want to go back to aristocracy. Then you had the radical communists. Then you had the softer version of the communists who sometimes didn't even like Moscow that much. And then you had the fascists, the Nazis, who were also into traditional conspiracy ideology. So everybody was trying to get ahead and recruit people and change the system the way they wanted to. These Russian guys, they were strangely professional about all of this. This was 1923. The plan was for a full-blown communist revolution, Red Army invading to total takeover. And so when you look at all these different aspects that were in place, right? So the communists, they had a cell system, right? They were creating these espionage cells, sometimes as little as 3 people per cell. So if you lose one cell, the damage is not that great. And by using the cell system, they could then create different groups. One was the warriors, the fighters. The other one was terrorists. Then you had the infiltrators who would join the army, the Reichswehr, the police, and everything. All these different groups, and one group obviously was the propaganda. And so you had this guy, his name was Willy Münzenberg. They called him the Red Millionaire. And he was running all kinds of communist papers in the 20s, books and theater and even cinema. They would get these terrible movies from the Soviet Union, and then they would make a German version out of it, and it became quite successful because that's all there was in cinema back then. There wasn't much choice back then. People didn't expect that much, in terms of entertainment. So this was kind of like a situation that is compared to different countries nowadays. People talk about a Weimar type situation. It's very liberal, but it's also, there's all kinds of freaky ideologies around. It's very unstable, and everybody tries to use freedom of the press and freedom of speech to hide behind and plan some sort of revolution. And so, so this is, so then in September of 1923, President Ebert he initiated a state of emergency because they knew what the communists were about to do. So he gave the executive power went over to the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Gessler, and General Segt, so they could do all kinds of things and try to shut down the communists, because the communists were ready to roll. They told everybody it's on. We're gonna start now because we spent years preparing this. There was the Soviet official Grigory Zinoviev. He was wiring his instructions from the Kremlin to Berlin on October 1st, and they said in a matter of weeks the big event is going to happen. So everybody was getting ready. In the Soviet Union, they were all talking about this in the military schools. They said it's going to happen. We will get involved. And on October 10th, the Red Banner newspaper, the communist paper in Germany, they published a text by Stalin himself announcing it's going to happen very soon. So the Soviets were getting the money. They were getting the money in. They were getting the grain ready to feed their revolution. Thousands of Soviet officials were ready to take over control over Germany. And the Soviet general Peter Skoblevsky had actually traveled to Germany because everything was about to happen. He was running an underground army of communist fighters. But then what happened is the German government, they implemented some kind of martial law state. And so they were moving troops into parts of Germany. They surrounded the city of Dresden and they deposed the government there. So this is the point where the revolution was canceled for the moment. And this was shocking to everybody, all the communists in Germany, because they thought everything was going to happen right then and there. So very frustrating for these people like Willy Münzenberg. You know, he was a rich guy and he showed his wealth. And he thought, well, it's just postponed, right? It's going to happen in a few years. We're just going to publish the newspapers, get ready, make more preparation. It's going to happen. But what happened was the Nazis became powerful throughout the 20s, and nothing was really moving ahead with the communists. So at some point, and this is what historians have figured out since then, at some point the Kremlin had a different strategy. The Russians thought, the Russian leadership thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a big fat war in Western Europe? You know, the Germans fighting the French, fighting the British. Let them have it. Let them, just weaken each other, and then the Red Army would move in. And also, the order was handed down to the German communists, do not stop the Nazis. Do not stop them. So the intention was there's supposed to be a Nazi government, there's supposed to be war, and the Red Army would win later. But this new plan was not something that was told to Mr. Willy Münzenberg. And when he started to figure out what was going on, his old Bolshevik friends were already killed in the Soviet Union because they were not on board as well. So he figured out, I got myself into the worst possible mess. Mr. Münzenberg escaped from Germany, and not only were the fascists after him, but the communist intelligence services as well. And at some point, Mr. Münzenberg publicly denounced Stalin, called him a traitor of the revolution, and then Mr. Münzenberg's dead body was found in a little forest somewhere in France, hanged. So this is kind of a short version of the program right? This takes years to prepare, sometimes decades to prepare. They want to get to a point where they can just launch the final phase, take over, and then establish the new system, and then clean out a bunch of guys that they don't want, people that worked for them, but they don't need them any longer. So they can just kill those guys off and then grow the next generation of officials, the next generation of young guys who know nothing else. So this is how you solve any future problem once you have that new system in. So this is in a nutshell what happened back then. Um, and this is kind of the same stuff that we see in the United States. Now, of course, the authorities or the government in the US is not stupid, right? Because insurgency is a science, but also counterinsurgency is a science. And the Americans, they have sort of perfected that science, I guess. I would not underestimate the American authorities, because even decades ago, they had something like Project Camelot, where they would send out psychologists and anthropologists, and they had computers and algorithms. They were trying to predict uprisings, and nowadays they can do that much better, because they always wanted to be aware of where a big threat is going to happen, so they can intervene early. Now, this is the same thing the Romans tried thousands of years ago, because they had limited security forces. They just had espionage. They just looked around. Is some uprising planned somewhere? How many soldiers can we send early to squash the uprising? Because we need more soldiers for other areas to conquer. And so, this is kind of this intricate relationship between insurgencies and counterinsurgencies.